A flight attendant slipped me a napkin. Pretend you're sick. Get off this plane. I ignored her. She returned, whispering, please, I'm begging you. 2 hours later, I understood why. The napkin was still warm from her hand when I unfolded it. The words were written in blue ink, the letters shaky, like she'd scrawled them while walking down the aisle. You are not safe. Pretend you are sick. Get off this plane immediately. I looked up. The flight attendant, her name tag read Alyssa, had already moved 3 rows past me, checking overhead bins with mechanical precision. But she wasn't looking at the bins. She was scanning faces. And when her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Terror. Pure, unfiltered terror. Not irritation, not confusion, not the tired annoyance of someone pulling a prank on a random passenger. This was the face of a woman who believed someone on this plane was about to die. I told myself it was a mistake, wrong passenger, some kind of bizarre misunderstanding. I crumpled the napkin and shoved it into the seat pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs despite my best efforts to stay calm. But she came back. Alyssa leaned down as if checking my seatbelt, her voice barely a whisper against the ambient hum of the engines warming up. Please, I am begging you, if you stay on this flight, you will not land alive. And that's when I knew, whatever was happening on United Flight 847 from Los Angeles to Boston, I was somehow at the center of it. My name is Marisol Reyes. I'm 32 years old, a travel nurse who spent the last 8 years moving between hospitals in crisis, pandemic surges, natural disasters, anywhere the system was breaking down and bodies were needed. I've held the hands of dying patients when their families couldn't be there. I've watched doctors make impossible choices about who gets the last ventilator. I've seen more death than most people encounter in a lifetime. None of it prepared me for that Tuesday in October. I was exhausted, bone deep, soul-tired exhausted. I'd just finished a brutal 3-month contract at a trauma center in East Los Angeles, and all I wanted was to see my mother. She'd had a mild heart attack 6 weeks earlier. Mild, they said, like any heart attack could be mild, and I hadn't been able to get away. The guilt had been eating at me every single day. So when my contract ended, I booked the first flight I could find, changed my original Thursday booking to Tuesday morning, paid the $200 change fee without blinking. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to walk through her front door in Brookline and see her face light up the way it always did when I came home. I texted my sister Camila from the gate at LAX. Boarded early flight. Don't tell mom. I want to see her face when I walk in. She sent back a string of heart emojis and a gif of someone ugly crying with joy. I smiled at my phone, feeling lighter than I had in months. That was 11:47 a.m. Pacific time. The last moment of my old life. I noticed Alyssa before I even reached my seat. She was standing near the boarding door, greeting passengers with the standard flight attendant smile, warm but detached. Professional. But something about her was different. Her eyes didn't match her mouth. They were too alert, too focused. She wasn't just welcoming people onto the plane. She was studying them, cataloging faces, looking for something, or someone. When our eyes met, she hesitated, just for a half second, a tiny hitch in her rhythm. Then she looked away, her smile never faltering. I filed it away as nothing. Flight attendants dealt with thousands of passengers. Maybe she was new. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe I was projecting my own exhaustion onto strangers. My seat was 14C, an aisle seat near the middle of the plane, exactly what I'd requested when I changed my booking. I liked aisle seats. Easy access to the bathroom, no climbing over strangers, quick exit when we landed. Simple preferences that, as it turned out, would save my life. As I settled in, I scanned the cabin out of habit. 8 years of working in high-stress medical environments had trained me to assess situations quickly, to notice what didn't fit, what felt wrong, what might become a problem before it escalated. The man in 14A, my window seat neighbor, was already there. Mid-40s, gray hoodie, noise-canceling headphones. He gripped the armrest like the plane was already in turbulence. His knuckles white. Nervous flyer, I assumed. Common enough. Across the aisle in 14D sat a woman in an expensive charcoal business suit. She was beautiful in a sharp, corporate way, perfect makeup, perfect posture, but her leg was bouncing rapidly under the tray table. Her phone was in her hand, screen dark, but she kept glancing at it like she was expecting a message that hadn't come yet. Behind me, a teenage boy, maybe 16 or 17, clutched a black backpack to his chest like it contained something precious. His breathing was too fast. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. And near the emergency exit in row 10, a man in a black leather jacket sat perfectly still. Too still. No phone, no book, no nervous energy, just waiting. His eyes moved slowly across the cabin, lingering on specific passengers, the woman in the business suit, the teenage boy, me, before settling on the cockpit door. Stop it, I told myself. You're exhausted. You're seeing patterns that aren't there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The napkin came 12 minutes after I sat down. Alyssa walked down the aisle with a tray of pre-departure beverages for first class, but she wasn't serving anyone. She was making her way toward me with a deliberate casualness that felt rehearsed. When she reached row 14, she leaned down as if adjusting the napkin on my tray table, except there was no tray table. It was still stowed. She pressed the folded napkin into my hand without making eye contact. Complimentary beverage service will begin shortly, she said in a perfectly normal voice. Then she kept walking. I unfolded the napkin under the pretense of wiping my hands. The words hit me like ice water. You are not safe. Pretend you are sick. Get off this plane immediately. My first instinct was denial. This had to be some kind of mistake. A prank. A test of some security protocol I didn't understand. People didn't just hand strangers cryptic warnings on napkins. That was the plot of a thriller movie, not a Tuesday morning flight to Boston. But when I looked up, Alyssa had stopped near the galley at the front of the cabin. She turned her head slowly, deliberately, and locked eyes with me. The fear in her expression was unmistakable. Act now, her eyes seemed to say, before it's too late. I didn't act. I should have. Instead, I rationalized. I told myself that if there was a real threat, there would be an announcement, that trained professionals would handle it, that I, a random travel nurse, couldn't possibly be the target of anything sinister. I crumpled the napkin and shoved it into the seat pocket in front of me. That was my first mistake. The plane began taxiing at 12:08 p.m. I watched through the window across the aisle as we pulled away from the gate, the terminal shrinking behind us. The engines hummed louder. The safety video played on the overhead screens. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't stop watching the other passengers. The man in the black leather jacket near the emergency exit was still unnaturally still. His hands rested on his thighs, fingers slightly curled, like he was ready to spring into action at any moment. He hadn't looked at the safety video once. His attention remained fixed on the cockpit door and on Alyssa. The woman in the business suit had started texting furiously, her manicured fingers flying across her phone screen. Her expression was tight, controlled, but I could see the tension in her jaw. Whatever she was typing, it wasn't casual. The teenage boy behind me was hyperventilating. I could hear his ragged breaths even over the engine noise. At one point, he whispered something that sounded like I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this on a loop. And the man in 14A, my window seat neighbor, kept glancing at the overhead bin above our row. He'd already opened it twice since boarding, both times without putting anything inside or taking anything out. My skin prickled with unease. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The overhead bins in first class, the ones near the cockpit, had been sealed shut with yellow zip ties. Not the normal latches. Industrial strength zip ties, the kind you'd use to secure cargo or evidence. I'd only seen that once before, in a hospital security training video about responding to terrorism threats. That's when Alyssa came back. She approached my row slowly, her face arranged in a mask of professional calm, but I could see her hands trembling as she pretended to adjust my armrest. "Ma'am, you look pale," she said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Are you feeling all right?" I stared at her. "I'm fine." She leaned closer, her lips barely moving. "Pretend. Right now. Say you feel faint. This is your last chance." The plane was accelerating now, heading toward the runway. In 2 minutes, we would be in the air. In 2 minutes, there would be no getting off. "Why?" I whispered back. "What's happening?" "Your seat." She breathed. "It was targeted. They think you're someone else. Someone they want dead. If this plane takes off with you in 14C, none of us are landing in Boston." My heart stopped. Your seat was targeted. I'd changed my flight. I'd paid $200 to switch from Thursday to Tuesday. I'd specifically requested 14C because I liked aisle seats. But I hadn't been assigned 14C originally. The system had assigned me 14C after I made the change, which meant someone had been monitoring the booking system. Someone who knew which seat their target would be sitting in. Someone who didn't know the target had canceled and a random travel nurse had taken her place. Who, I managed, federal witness, relocated identity, was supposed to be on this flight with protective custody waiting in Boston. Alyssa's voice was barely audible. She got cold feet. Changed her flight to tomorrow. The people who want her dead don't know yet. They think you're her. The runway lights flashed past the windows. The engines roared. "I need to get off this plane," I said. "It's too late for that." Alyssa's face was pale. "We're already cleared for takeoff. If you try to deplane now, they'll know something's wrong. They'll act early. Everyone dies. Then what do I do?" She pressed something into my palm. A small metallic object, an air marshal's badge. "When I give the signal, you run for the cockpit. Don't stop for anything. There are 2 agents in first class who will cover you. The captain has been briefed. This plane is turning around the second we're airborne." The plane lurched as the wheels left the ground. "Wait," I started, but Alyssa was already walking away. The first 10 minutes of the flight were the longest of my life. I sat frozen in 14C, hyper aware of every movement around me. The man in the black leather jacket near the emergency exit. The woman in the business suit still texting. The teenage boy hyperventilating behind me. The man in 14A obsessively checking the overhead bin. The badge in my palm felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I didn't know what signal I was waiting for. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I was a nurse, not a federal agent. I was trained to stop bleeding and restart hearts, not evade domestic terrorists at 30,000 feet. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to die on this plane. Not today. Not when my mother was waiting in Brookline with no idea I was coming. I texted Camila. My fingers shook so badly badly I had to retype it 3 times. Something's happening. If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, call the FBI. Tell them flight 847 from LAX to Boston. Tell them 14C. She responded immediately. What, Mari, are you okay? I didn't answer. I couldn't explain. Instead, I typed one more message. Tell Mom I love her, just in case. Then I switched my phone to airplane mode and waited. The signal came 17 minutes into the flight. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain James Morrison speaking. We've been asked to return to Los Angeles due to a medical emergency on board. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin. Passengers groaned. Some cursed under their breath. A man in row 6 loudly complained about missing his connection. But beneath the mundane frustration, I sensed something else. A sharpening of attention from certain passengers. The man in the black jacket sat up straighter. The woman in the business suit stopped texting. The teenage boy let out a small whimper. The man in 14A stood up. I need to use the restroom, he announced loudly, already moving toward the aisle. Alyssa appeared instantly, blocking his path. Sir, the seatbelt sign is on. Please return to your seat. It's an emergency. I understand, but for your safety. He shoved past her. That's when everything happened at once. The man in the black leather jacket launched himself out of row 10, his hand reaching inside his jacket. 2 men in first class, the air marshals Alyssa had mentioned, were already on their feet, moving toward him with practiced speed. Federal agents. Nobody move. But the man in 14A wasn't going to the restroom. He was going for the overhead bin, the one he'd been checking obsessively since boarding. I didn't think. I just moved. I unbuckled my seatbelt and threw myself into the aisle, colliding with him just as his hand closed around the latch. We went down hard, tangled in a mess of limbs and carry-on bags. He was bigger than me, stronger, but I had momentum and adrenaline and the primal certainty that if he opened that bin, everyone on this plane would die. He hit me, a sharp blow to the side of my head that sent stars exploding across my vision. I felt blood warm and wet streaming down my temple, but I didn't let go. The bin, I screamed. There's something in the bin. One of the air marshals reached us in seconds. He wrenched the man off me and slammed him face first into the aisle floor. Metal cuffs clicked, but the other passengers weren't done. The teenager in row 15 was standing now, his black backpack clutched to his chest, tears streaming down his face. I didn't want to do this, he sobbed. They said no one would get hurt. They said it would just look like an accident. The woman in the business suit was already being restrained by the second marshal. She fought like a cornered animal, screaming about timers and remote triggers and how they were all dead anyway. Didn't they understand? But it was the man in the black leather jacket who scared me the most. He hadn't moved, hadn't fought. He just stood there, perfectly still, watching the chaos with an expression of cold amusement. You're too late, he said calmly. The device is on a timer. Impact altitude. We hit 30,000 feet. It triggers automatically. He smiled. We're at 28,000 right now. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. Urgent now. Emergency descent initiated. All passengers brace for. The rest of his words were lost as the plane dropped. I've been in emergencies before. I've watched patients code on the table while machines screamed warnings and nurses shouted orders. But nothing prepared me for the sensation of a commercial aircraft in emergency descent. The oxygen masks deployed. People screamed. The plane tilted at an angle that felt impossibly wrong, like we were falling out of the sky. And through it all, I watched Alyssa. She moved through the chaos with inhuman calm, checking passengers, issuing commands, radioing the cockpit. At one point she grabbed the black backpack from the hysterical teenager and threw it toward the rear galley. Everybody down, she shouted. Cover your heads. I don't know how long the descent lasted. 30 seconds, 2 minutes. Time stopped making sense. All I knew was the screaming and the pressure and the certainty that I was going to die, with my mother never knowing I'd tried to come home. Then the plane leveled out. We were still in the air, still flying. The engines hummed at a different pitch, lower, steadier. The captain's voice returned, strained but controlled. We are currently at 8,000 feet and descending for emergency landing at Edwards Air Force Base. All passengers remain in brace position until we are on the ground. The man in the black jacket was laughing. Altitude trigger, he said, still amused. We got below the threshold. Cute, but it doesn't matter. Even if the device didn't go off, you just made 100 witnesses. This goes public now. The whole operation is exposed. You lost. One of the air marshals punched him hard. The laughing stopped. We landed at Edwards Air Force Base at 12:47 p.m. I remember the runway lights flashing past. I remember the jolt of the wheels hitting tarmac. I remember the sudden, overwhelming silence as the engines cut. Then the doors opened, and everything became noise again. Federal agents in tactical gear swarmed the plane. Passengers were evacuated row by row. Each one questioned, documented, photographed. The 4 suspects, the man in 14A, the man in the black jacket, the woman in the business suit, and the teenage boy, were removed in handcuffs and loaded into separate vehicles. The overhead bin above 14C was sealed with evidence tape and carefully removed by a bomb squad in full protective gear. I learned later that the device inside was a pressure-triggered explosive, designed to detonate when the cabin reached cruising altitude. It had been placed in that specific bin because it was directly above seat 14C, the seat assigned to a federal witness named Elena Marchetti, who was scheduled to testify against a domestic extremist network linked to 3 previous bombings. Elena had changed her flight at the last minute. I had taken her seat. The device had enough C4 to blow a hole in the fuselage at 30,000 feet. If it had detonated, all 187 passengers would have died, including me, including Alyssa, including the teenage boy who had been coerced into planting the bomb and was now in protective custody, sobbing about how they'd threatened his little sister. The man in the black jacket, real name David Allen Kurtz, former military demolitions expert turned domestic terrorist, had orchestrated the entire thing. He wasn't there to trigger the bomb, he was there to make sure no one stopped it. And he would have succeeded if one flight attendant hadn't decided to slip a napkin to a stranger. I spent the next 6 hours in a windowless room at Edwards, answering questions from people with badges and serious faces. FBI Special Agent Patricia Thornton, 16 years with the Counterterrorism Division. Homeland Security Investigator Marcus Webb, a quiet man with kind eyes who brought me water and tissues. Air Force OSI, Agent Lieutenant Colonel Diana Reyes, no relation, who asked the same questions 3 different ways to make sure my story stayed consistent. I told them everything. The napkin, Alyssa's warnings, the observations I'd made about the other passengers, the moment I'd tackled the man reaching for the bin. When I was done, Agent Thornton leaned back in her chair and studied me. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," she said. "Maybe both." "I'm a nurse," I replied. "I don't think, I just act." "Well, your acting saved 187 lives today." She slid a form across the table. "We're going to need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. What happened on Flight 847 is part of an ongoing investigation into a domestic extremist network. You cannot discuss the details with anyone, not family, not friends, not journalists. If this leaks, it compromises not just the case but the safety of multiple protected witnesses." I signed without hesitation. I didn't want to talk about it anyway. As I was leaving the room, Agent Thornton called after me. "Miss Reyes, the woman who gave you the napkin, Alyssa, she specifically requested to be assigned to this flight. She's been undercover in this network for 18 months. When she saw you board in place of the actual target, she had about 2 minutes to decide whether to break cover and warn you or stay silent and let you die." I stopped walking. She chose to save me. She chose to save everyone. By warning you, she gave us the opportunity to land the plane before the device triggered. If she'd stayed silent, the bomb would have gone off, and we'd be pulling 187 bodies out of the Pacific Ocean right now. Agent Thornton paused. "She'd like to speak with you, if you're willing." I was willing. Alyssa, her real name was Catherine Shaw, supervisory special agent with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, met me in a small conference room that smelled like stale coffee and industrial cleaner. She looked different out of the flight attendant uniform. Older, tired, human. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure I'd survive the day," I replied. "So we're both dealing with unexpected outcomes." She almost smiled. "Almost. I need you to understand something," she said quietly. "When I gave you that napkin, I was breaking 18 months of deep cover. The network I'd infiltrated, they had plans for 6 more attacks over the next 2 years. Schools, government buildings, public events, hundreds of potential victims. And now we've arrested 4 of their key operatives, including David Kurtz, who's been on our most wanted list for a decade. The kid Marcus, the teenager, is cooperating fully. He's giving us names, locations, communication channels. We've already prevented 2 additional planned attacks based on his information." She met my eyes. "All because I handed a stranger a napkin. Why me?" The question had been burning in my mind for hours. "You could have let me die. The bomb would have gone off, but you would have stayed undercover. You could have kept gathering intelligence, stopped more attacks later." I thought about that. Her voice was steady, unapologetic. For about 30 seconds, I ran the calculation. "Your life versus hundreds of future lives. The math said let you die. But you didn't." "No." She shook her head slowly. "Because that's not how this works. You don't trade innocent lives like currency. You don't let someone die on a maybe." I looked at you, really looked at you, and I saw a woman who was just trying to get home to her family. You weren't part of this. You didn't choose this. And I couldn't watch you die for a crime you knew nothing about. I felt tears prick my eyes. The first tears I'd allowed myself since the plane landed. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "The people behind this, the network, they know what happened. They know I'm the one who blew the operation. And they know you're alive." She paused. "We're putting you in protective custody until we're sure the immediate threat has been neutralized. Probably 48 to 72 hours. My mother has been notified that your flight was delayed due to a mechanical issue. She doesn't know the truth. For her safety, she can't know the truth. At least not yet." I nodded. I understood, but it still hurt. "One more thing," Catherine said as I turned to leave. "The real target, Elena Marchetti, is testifying tomorrow. Because of what happened today. Because the network was exposed before they could stop her. Her testimony is going forward. She's going to help bring down people who've been hurting innocent families for years." "Good," I said. "I hope she destroys them." "She will. And when the history books are written, if they ever are, your name won't be in them. You'll just be a random passenger who got lucky. But I'll know the truth. The people in that room will know the truth." She met my eyes one final time. "You weren't lucky, Marisol. You were brave. And brave is the reason 186 other people got to go home to their families today." I finally made it to Boston 3 days later. The protective custody ended when the FBI confirmed that the immediate threat had been neutralized. 2 more arrests in Nevada, a weapons cache seized in Arizona. David Kurtz's entire operation rolled up like a cheap carpet. The story made national news, but my name was never mentioned. Just an alert passenger who assisted law enforcement in preventing a potential security threat. My mother met me at Logan Airport. She was thinner than the last time I'd seen her, still recovering from the heart attack, but her eyes lit up the moment she spotted me in the crowd. Marisol, she rushed toward me, arms already open. My baby, you're here. You're finally here. I held her for a long time, longer than I'd ever held her before. She smelled like the lavender soap she'd used my entire childhood, and I felt something break inside me, some wall I'd been holding up since the moment Alyssa pressed that napkin into my hand. Mama, I whispered into her shoulder. I love you so much. I know, Mija, I know. She pulled back to look at my face, and her expression shifted. What's wrong? Something happened. I can see it in your eyes. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to describe the napkin and the bomb and the 18 minutes when I genuinely believed I was going to die. I wanted her to know how close she'd come to losing me. But I couldn't. The NDA, her heart, the weight of a truth too heavy to share. So I just smiled and wiped my eyes and said, I'm just tired, Mama. It was a long flight. She didn't believe me. Mothers never do. But she let it go. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom with the faded star stickers still on the ceiling, I made myself a promise. I would never again ignore my instincts. I would never dismiss the warning signs. I would never rationalize away the feeling that something was wrong. And I would spend the rest of my life paying attention to the strangers around me, the flight attendants with fear in their eyes, the teenagers clutching backpacks too tightly, the people who move through the world with invisible weights on their shoulders, because you never know who might need a napkin.